A mixed outlook for the global economy this year, but in China and the United States, the world's two largest economies, things are looking up. Hi everyone, I'm Sean Caleb sitting in for Anna Naidu, and you're watching The Heat. Many economists predicted a downturn in the global economy in 2024. Two of the world's largest economies, Japan and the United Kingdom, are now in a recession, and Germany, Europe's largest economy, is likely in recession as well. The International Monetary Fund says negative growth in Argentina lowered the growth forecast for Latin America and the Caribbean. But some countries are showing resilience. In January, the IMF upgraded its outlook for China as well as the United States. A lot to talk about concerning the global economy. Let's bring in our panel and start the discussion. Joining us from Kunshan, China, is John Quelch. John's the Executive Vice Chancellor at Duke Kunshan University. From Maryland, Otaviano Canuto. He is a Senior Fellow with the Policy Center for New South and former Vice President and Executive Director of the World Bank. Here in Washington, in our studios, Klaus Larres. He is a fellow at the Wilson Center and a distinguished professor in history and international affairs at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And Liang is an endowed chair professor of economics at Willamette University in Oregon. All of you, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I kind of want to get right to it. And Jan, I want to begin with you and talk about just where China is right now, because obviously it made a move some time ago from made in China to manufactured in China. And if you look at the numbers that have come out of China recently, its GDP was at 5.2% in 2023, better than many had anticipated. And secondly, the International Monetary Fund is projecting China's growth to be about 4.6% this year. Now, a lot of countries would be very happy with that, but China is hearing it from critics outside about the challenges. What challenges do you think that China is facing right now?
Yeah, good to talk to you, Sean. So you're absolutely right. China came out very well last year, grew at 5.2%, and this year the projection is 4.6% by the IMF, and that was also echoed by many of the investment banks around the world. And yet, I think many cities and provinces in China, they are turning in their plans, and they are most of them projecting to grow at 5%. And we'll see that soon on March the 5th, when we have the National People's Congress, where we'll start to hear the growth targets and so on. But in terms of the challenges, I think it's pretty much similar with last year. And so the property sector slump, that's going to continue to weigh on the economy to some degree. Although we have seen that the market has been improving with the recent 5-year LPR cuts, that could also add more the sort of stimulus to the sector. So we're likely to see demand. People are buying more houses, not only because the mortgage rates will be lower, but also 2023 we have seen the completion rate for those unfinished apartment housing has gone up by 17%. So that would also help to boost the confidence of buying houses. On the supply side, many of the state-owned enterprises are whitelisting some of the property developers and preparing to lend, $8 billion more to these property developments. So I think all these are wonderful, welcoming signs for the stabilization of the property sector. And also China has pivoted towards, new energy, new technology, smart manufacturing. So all of this will also be helpful. Consumer demand is doing well, especially from the early data that we've seen from the Lunar New Year. There has been, 17% more travelers, 8% more consumer spending. So if that spending momentum can continue on, I think that would really be a great boost to the economy in 2024.
And real quickly, we know that at the APEC meeting, President Xi made it clear he wants to see more outside investment in China. How critical is that going to be?
Well, I think it is important. I think what the foreign investor can bring is not just the quantity in terms of capital. China is not lacking capital, but these foreign investors can bring our technologies, know-hows, and so that would be super helpful for China to continue to pursue the high quality growth. And I know there has been some concerns about the so-called collapse in the FDI in China, which I think in some ways is misleading. China still received $153 billion of FDI last year, a very slight drop from the year before, and that is in the context of the global FDI inflow to developing countries has been declining. So I think China still provide a vibrant environment,
right.
As Prime Minister Li has talked about, that we have the foreign investors are earning 9% of return from investing in China. So I think it will continue to attract foreign direct investments.
Okay, good stuff. John, let's talk about high inflation and really what that is doing to the global economy. Here in the United States, it's at 3.1%. That is higher than the Federal Reserve wants, and that means that the Fed has not cut interest rates the way a lot of people kind of hope they would by this point. They want to get inflation down to about 2%. Talk about global inflation and especially what it's doing to the economy here in the United States. Borrowing is at 5.4% right now, and for many people who want to buy homes, it's just too much.
So inflation, Sean, is considerably lower than it was 2 years ago, as you know. Chairman Powell got off to a very slow start in terms of fighting inflation when it first surfaced. And he is absolutely, I think, determined for his own reputation as much as anything else to get the inflation level back down to the steady state of 2%. Inflation was down in November, but ticked up again in December in the U.S. A lot depends in terms of inflation on the level of consumer demand. Consumption is 65% of the U.S. economy, and the consumer resilience has been very strong over the last year or two, surprising many people. But consumers at this point have run up a lot of credit card debt, and in addition, they have also indicated in the January retail sales data less appetite for spending. So there's a big question mark at the moment over the March Federal Reserve meeting, whether or not the rate will be cut. Approximately 60% of economists are forecasting that it will be cut, 40% not, because, of course, the employment market is still very strong and very robust. So this is a very delicate balancing act for the Fed. And I believe personally that there will be a cut in March.
Let me play devil's advocate for a minute, because they meet in 3 weeks. If there is no cut, with 60% of economists saying it is going to be out there, the markets are at all-time highs right now, and that gives people who have money in their 401ks or other investments this kind of feeling that things are good. If the rates don't drop and the markets drag down a bit, what could that do to the economy?
Certainly the markets will react negatively because a rate cut is being currently built into the stock market prices. There's no doubt about that. But I think that if the rate is not cut, the risk is that there will be this drift into a more recessionary scenario. That would, of course, potentially have a further negative impact on not only U.S. economic growth, but also on the global forecast for 2024 as well. So the United States, like China, has some measure of international responsibility as well as responsibility for the protection of its own economy.
Klaus, Germany's central bank has been talking about the country being in a possible recession. And it's kind of ironic given the timing, because Germany was just moved into third place in terms of the largest economy in the world. So really kind of mixed information out there, celebrating, I guess, in one hand, and also very concerned moving forward. And consumer, industrial demand is weak right now. Domestic investment also being held back. I want to play you a quick soundbite from German Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck talking about the fact that he believes Germany is facing a bigger problem right now.
The biggest structural problem for the German economy in the coming years is the shortage of skilled workers and labour. I would say the labour force, because it's no longer just about skilled workers. There's a shortage everywhere.
Okay, talk about perhaps the weak economy as well, and also the lack of skilled workers. What is that? It's kind of a 1-2 punch.
Yeah, Germany is facing a very difficult economic situation. You know, the forecast was slashed from 1.3% to something like 0.3%. That is, you know, no growth whatsoever almost. And this is very difficult. That has, of course, something to do with the Ukraine war, the energy crisis, the cutting off of energy receipts from Russia altogether. And that has had a deep impact on the German economy. What also is lacking is consumer demand. And that is an old problem of the German economy, that consumers simply don't buy as much and don't spend as much as they should. And that is perhaps one of the reasons why Germany has become one of the leading export nations in the world, because they can't rely on their own consumers.
And also, Germans are facing higher energy costs and borrowing costs. So when you couple that with what you just said, how is that affecting average daily life?
Inflation is still high, prices have risen, salaries have not risen, and actually, much to the surprise of almost everyone in the world, German salaries are traditionally not particularly high. If you compare German salaries with American salaries on average, then the American salaries on average are significantly higher. So German consumers actually have a right to complain, because their purchasing power is quite limited and has been limited for quite some time. The energy crisis, however, has driven prices up. So the situation for the average man and woman in the street in Germany is tough. That is one reason why we see widespread protests by farmers, many strikes in the railroads, the airplanes, pilots, they're all on strike. The reason why is because they can't make ends meet. And this is a severe problem. The government is aware of that, but it needs to address it. And there is another problem with the German economy has, and that is that idea that the budget needs to be balanced. Constitutionally, the government is obliged to balance the budget. To be precise, they can raise new debts at 0.35% of GDP, which is not an awful lot. No. That debt break can be suspended, but only in times of emergency, like during the pandemic. And at the moment, they have concluded there is no emergency, so the debt break has not been suspended. The budget needs to be balanced. And of course, that makes life very difficult for the government and by consequence for the consumer. Not all debt is bad debt. And as Keynes rightly said, in bad times, you should actually increase your debt and spend so that the country is being spent out of recession. But that is not so far the conclusion of the German government.
Otaviano, I want to thank you for your patience. We're just now getting to you, but you can't talk about Latin America without talking about Argentina. It has 57% poverty level right now, which is staggering, the highest in 20 years. And newly elected President Milei has had these grandiose economic plans to breathe some economic life into Argentina, and it simply hasn't worked. Retail sales plunging by 28% in January, also the devaluation of the peso. Just back up a second and give me your assessment of Argentina, and really, how much longer can it last like this?
Look, it's a pleasure to be here again with you, Sean. Well, the fact of the matter is that the Milei's government has started a sort of a very drastic fiscal adjustment. Overall, he left aside some of the things that he promised during the campaign, such as moving the economy towards dollarization. But ultimately, there is a deep fiscal problem in Argentina, and he has decided to face it up front. Now, this year is going to be very tough. The projections coming out of the IMF note to the G20 ministers of finance and central banks released today has brought a forecast of a downfall of 2.8% of Argentina's GDP. On the other hand, provided that at least the figures on the fiscal side change a bit, Argentina may have a much better 2025. The forecast by the IMF even suggests something getting to 5% because of the idle capacity that is there and so on. The most relevant thing to be done in Argentina now is to shift the gears on the fiscal side so as to make possible that, combined with monetary tightening, the inflation stops and falls down. That's a precondition. It's going to be tough, but it's a medicine that is hard to avoid.
You know, you talked about him moving away from some of his election promises, but is the chainsaw going to come out? Is he going to really have to have very austere cuts into government spending?
Well, those expenditures that depend substantially on the arbitration by the federal government, and he has already done some of those, some transfers to subnational levels that the federal government is expected to do, but he could cut. The deeper structural changes, they will depend a lot on his ability really to carry forward his agenda with Congress.
Yeah,
that's where things stand.
He's got to find some way to move forward as a collective unit. You're exactly right. Jan, let me ask you, you talked earlier about two sessions coming up, the legislative entity within China, and that's where its reforms come from, that's where the economic policies come from, and we've talked about the fact that China's youth is struggling, the frustration there, and you talked a bit about the housing project, housing moving forward within that nation as well. Single individuals now allowed to buy houses in Beijing, Shanghai, and other cities. What are you looking for in two sessions?
Yeah, so first of all, let me allow me to make two corrections. I think I should call Premier Li Qiang, not Prime Minister.
Sure.
It's important to get the titles right. And also for the property lending, the state-owned commercial banks, they're earmarking, $88 billion for extra lending, and so that would help to, complete some of the unfinished projects and so on and so forth. So what I'm really looking forward to, the two sessions, I think for one is we're really hoping that there will be more, fiscal expansion. That would really help to boost the domestic demand and also help to inject some more confidence to consumers. If fiscal expansion is able to, boost, for example, social spending, right, provide more public services on education, healthcare, unemployment benefits, and so on and so forth, I think that would be an extra help for the consumers to strengthen their confidence, allow them to spend more out of their income. And other things I think we're really looking forward to are structural reforms. And so that has to do with, for example, relaxing continuously, the hukou restriction, which I think the government has been doing. They're trying to really relax the hukou restrictions on some of the smaller cities, not right now the mega cities, because that would take some graduate process. There's just many, I think, structural reforms that can be done at the governmental level. For example, fiscal reform in terms of, giving more fiscal agencies to the local governments to allow them, to have reliable sources of financing, so they can go ahead and help to boost their local economies and also provide the necessary social services.
Perhaps move
to
more
local
quickly
residents.
rather than wait from the information to come down from on high.
Right, exactly.
Okay, it's also interesting because I know that there were opinion articles in the Chinese papers last week saying it's a very critical time for China, that reforms have to be embraced from the top down, and it's a very small window, and if not taken advantage of, it could be an opportunity wasted. Expand on that, if you will.
Right. I think, as China now embarks on this new sort of transition, this journey that are moving away from the property sector driven, investment-led kind of growth. Now, China is trying to pursue the high quality growth. So we need more support to foster these new industries before we tear down, the old sort of sectors. And on the other hand, I think, like you mentioned, employment is a problem for the youth, and we need to provide more support and also more, welfare, more social programs that would, again, help to strengthen the confidence of the consumers. One thing I think is sometimes misunderstood is that, there's actually has been really healthy income growth at the, household level. Last year, the disposable household income has grown by 6%, 6.1%, higher than the GDP growth rate. But what has impeded, households from spending is that they're ratcheting up savings. They have been, accumulating a lot of savings in the past 2 years.
Right.
And one of the reasons is because the confidence is still not there. So I think, with the government taking more role in supporting the household sector, in supporting job creations, in supporting social spending, all of this, I think, will help to increase the domestic consumption demand. And I think that is very important, not only, for the households, their own living standards, but also to create a healthy demand for all these wonderful products,
Right.
From the manufacturing sector.
Okay, John, I want to turn back to Europe, if I can. The UK fell into recession at the end of last year. The economy shrinking by 0.3% between October and December. I want you to listen to what the British Finance Minister, Jeremy Hunt, had to say about the growth and what he expects.
We always expected growth to be weaker while we prioritise tackling inflation. That means higher interest rates. And that's the right thing to do because you can't have long-term healthy growth with high inflation, but also for families when there's a cost of living crisis, when the cost of their weekly shop is going up, their energy bills are much higher, it's the right thing to do. The underlying picture here is an economy that is more resilient than most people predicted. Inflation is coming down, real wages have been going up now for 6 months. And if we stick to our guns, independent forecasters say that by the early summer we could start to see interest rates falling, and that will be a very important relief for families with mortgages.
And John, to build on that, the IMF expects growth by 0.6% this year. Do you think that the UK is or has turned the corner?
The UK is in trouble, Sean. The double whammy of COVID and Brexit, that has really weakened the economy. We are not seeing improvements in productivity or competitiveness in Britain. The political leadership is weak. And overall, as you pointed out, the GDP growth last year was 0.1%. It's even lower than in Germany, as was mentioned earlier, at 0.4%. Inflation levels still remain strong and unacceptably high in the UK vis-a-vis other developed countries. And so the Chancellor, in his upcoming budget, has a big road to climb. It's going to be very difficult for him to find a way to offer benefits to the British public ahead of a general election this year, while at the same time maintaining some sort of fiscal and monetary discipline.
Klaus, I want to pick up because all across Europe and really other parts of the world, we have seen farmers turn out in great numbers. And you talked about it just a moment ago. They're frustrated with bureaucratic red tape. They're frustrated with what they believe are just punishing environmental regulations that they have to follow. And they're also concerned about phasing out tax breaks and other nations getting benefits that they don't get. What is Germany doing right now for their farmers? And do you think that Germany could be the entity that leads the way in finding a solution to all of this?
Well, the farmers are protesting from a very high level. 1/3 of the EU budget is actually spent on the common agricultural policy, which benefits farmers. So farmers have been coddled for some time. They've been given special subsidies. They've been given subsidies for the diesel to drive them tractors. And now they're protesting about the abandonment of these subsidies, which from a farming point of view is totally understandable. Who of us wants to give up any perks we have received in the past? But the tight financial situation in Germany, the economic crisis, demands certain action to be taken. And one of the decisions by Habeck, the economics minister, was to cut subsidies for diesel. That is now being rethought, and perhaps the pressure put on the government by the farmers will have some effect. So I think some compromise will be entered into, because we have 3 elections in Germany, state elections in the autumn, we have the European elections in June, and you don't want to have protests by farmers or by other groups in the middle of a very busy election year.
But one other thing that I think is frustrating for people around the world who have followed this, not just here, but in Greece and all the other nations as well, is farmers want a pushback on environmental regulations.
Absolutely.
And these were put in for good reason. And because economic times are tough, it's a very easy thing to look at. But now is not the time to trim those, one could argue.
Well, there is a heated discussion going on whether the Germans in particular, but the whole of Europe is overdoing it regarding climate change regulation. And here the Green Party in power in Germany, of course, has a very strong voice. If the Green Party wasn't in the government but in opposition, I'm sure the government would slightly have different climate change regulations and laws. So, perhaps you could argue climate change regulations and laws have been overdone and need to be scaled back a little bit, but not to zero. zero, of course, but perhaps, you know, the changing economic circumstances, the difficult economic circumstances of the day should be taken into consideration. But let me just bring in a dose of optimism here.
Okay.
When you go back 25 years, people talked about Germany as the sick man of Europe, and the Schröder government in the late 1990s implemented very tough and strict reforms, and within 6-7 years, by 2006, the German economy was booming, and they were the locomotive, the economic locomotive of Europe. That may well happen again. Right now, I can't see it. The government needs to get its act together, but I wouldn't exclude it entirely.
You know, Otaviano, I just got the word in my ear that we only have 3 minutes left. I am stunned. This has gone so fast. But several years ago, I was working on a story about Brazil being poised to be the 5th largest economy in the world. Well, that obviously didn't happen. But some good news. Brazil's economy did grow more than expected in December. President Lula is promising the country greater prosperity for all and has plans to boost industry and increase subsidized loans. What is the situation in Brazil, and what could that 1-2 punch do for that nation?
The question is that indeed growth surprised positively last year. It's important to highlight how the performance of the agriculture sector as well as oil allowed the economic growth to go above 3% last year. And the forecasts for this year are being reviewed towards 2%. 2% for this year and 2% for next year, which is not, let's say, a gigantic rate of growth, but enough to at least to allow for some minor increase in the per capita income. So that's basically the picture of the whole region, with some exceptions. You know, don't take Argentina as representative of what's going on. Of course, the Brazilian economy will have to rely on the demand for its products in the agriculture and oil area. If I may, just in 1 minute and a half, overall, I guess we can say that the global economy has shown a soft landing, better than expected, with inflation coming down. But I think John is too much optimistic with respect to interest rates here by the Fed. All the signals coming from the Federal Reserve are pointing to probably a first decrease of the rate by June, not by March. And while the market at a certain moment was projecting 6 rate decrease, now the dot plot coming from the Fed points out to 3%. And the minutes from the Fed released last week were very much in tune with that.
Yeah, Jan, I have 15 seconds. Tell me how important the Chinese New Year was for China.
Well, it's very important. I think it marks a sort of reset, optimistic starting of a very, energetic and hopeful year of the dragon. And again, consumer spending on tourism and services have indicated that, some improvements of the sentiment.
Okay. I wish I had more time for all of you, but I want to thank all our guests. And that does it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Calebs in Washington, D.C., and thanks for watching, everyone.